Eastside. Oh, thank you. Somebody press. Thank you. And also Janyne McConnaughey, who is an author and well, she does a lot of other things, lots of education. Will explain more exactly what these two fabulous people do. But over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can you guys see that okay? Everybody good? Okay. Well, thank you for being here today. I am so honored to get to do this. I love the work that you are doing there. I commend you. I've been hearing the greatest things about everything that you're doing besides feeding the community. So thank you for having us here today. Just a little bit about NAMI. I think most people have heard of us a little bit. We do a lot of work. We do a lot of education and support around mental health. And I'll let Lisa maybe explain a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. Unless you want me to do it myself, Lisa, I'm happy to do that too. Oh, I think you're on mute now. Oh, you're on mute, Lisa. Oh.
Okay, I'm on mute now. Okay, so Barbie Collins Young comes from NAMI Eastside. She has 25 years experience leading organizations, and she has a great passion for mental health, along with many years of serving the community in nonprofits. She is a trainer for mental health first aid, a certified life and coping skills coach, and has degrees in psychology and sociology. She serves on the Lake Washington School Foundation Board of Trustees and is a founding member of Balance in Mind. She is proud to have lived experience and managing her anxiety disorder, as well as recovery from her ACEs.
Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, I can see the rest of it now. So Janyne McConnaughey, Ph.D., nationally known trauma-informed author and advocate, lived with the effects of childhood sexual abuse from the time she was 3 years old until she entered therapy and began her healing journey at the age of 61. Realizing healing was possible for survivors, she has now authored 3 books describing the effects of childhood trauma and the paths to healing. Janine's passion is encouraging other survivors of childhood trauma and the paths to healing. She is currently a distinguished visiting professor at Tabor College, Masters in Education, Neuroscience and Trauma, and serves as the president for the board of directors for the Attachment and Trauma Network, ATN. Janyne built on her 40-year career in teaching and teacher education and expertise in early childhood development to help educators, caregivers, and church ministry workers understand and apply trauma-informed practices. Janine, her husband Scott, and rescue dog Weber live in south of Seattle and enjoy spending time with children and grandchildren. As you can see, we are really lucky to have these 2 experts come speak with us today. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Lisa. I just wanted to cover some of the things we're going to be talking about today. And Janine has some really great in-depth information about ACEs, so I think you're going to get a lot out of this. The first thing I wanted you to know, and I thought, Janine, we could tell a little bit of our story of how we came together and share what an incredible impact this introduction has had on my life. And the one thing I learned is that healing is possible. And Janine, I don't know if you want to share our story of what happened when we met.
So one of the things that has been so surprising about my life was during my healing process, I had to retire from my 40-year career in education. And I really thought my life was over. I told my therapist that I don't have a future. I've given up everything. I don't have a future. And she said, you do, you just can't see it yet, but I'll hold it for you till you get there. And it was a beautiful moment. So then all of a sudden opportunities started coming my way. And one of those opportunities is how Barbie and I met. And that was my daughter-in-law and my son work at Life Community Church in Kirkland. He also teaches at King's School, and and they hosted a panel on teen mental health. And Barbie was the one who orchestrated that and led the panel, and that's how we met, was that panel. And I sold one book that day. And that was to Barbie, and we became friends, and I watched her read the book, understand that healing was possible, which is what she just said, and to begin to just transform her life in ways that I have been so proud of. And not that she wasn't doing a lot already, but the mission of mental health became even more important in her life. And so part of what makes my life fulfilling is to realize that I can come and speak, and that people can pick up what they need and they can run with it and do amazing things in their life. And so that was our story.
Yeah. Well, and I'd like to add just a little bit more to that, which was the first book, which is Brave. I was not expecting to get out of it what I did, but I realized that we had very parallel stories, and I had never talked about mine. That was kind of how we dealt with it, is just don't talk about it and it will go away. But it doesn't really go away. And that's one thing I think we need to find power in, which is, the more I share my story, the more Janine shares her story, the more people we can touch and the more people we can hear. It's just by talking about this. And so that's why it's very special to me, because I feel like just reading her book saved me many thousands of dollars in therapy and time, because I felt like I healed with her through that. So I highly recommend anybody who wants to know more or has your own healing to do, save yourself some time and money and invest in her book. So I just wanted to thank you, because it really did change my life just with that one introduction. So that's why I'm so excited that you're here with us today. And so we just have I'm going to actually just finish telling you a little bit more about the slideshow, and then we're just going to do kind of interview style with this. So just so you know a little bit more about NAMI, last year, which is 2020, we supported over 13,000 people with their mental health and 6,350 students. As we know, mental health is very important right now, and we are seeing a lot more people who need the support. So thank you for everything that you guys are doing there with that as well. And you can always connect with us over email. I'll put my email in the chat as well, and recommend that you join our mailing list. But that is just about NAMI Eastside, and I'm going to turn it over to Janine, and I'm going to pull up our little interview. So the first question I have is if you could tell us a little bit more about your story and how you began this trauma-informed advocacy work.
So the story that I tell in Brave, which is the first book, is the story of my childhood that I mostly repressed. I was sexually abused in a daycare at the age of 3. My dad was a pastor. My mother was a teacher. My mother had her own trauma, and so when I was abused, she just couldn't handle that. It destroyed our relationship together. Your body survives, your mind survives by not remembering sometimes. And that's exactly what I did. And so at the age of 61, that all began to surface, and I ended up in therapy. But I can see how I was living out the results of that, and my abuse continued in different circumstances. And the problem is that when young children are abused, it makes them vulnerable, and the predators know how to spot them. And so it almost will it's almost guaranteed that it's going to keep occurring unless there's some type of major intervention and protection in place for the child. So from 3 to 23, and at 23, just feeling like there was no hope because this kept happening. I tried to drive my car off the edge of a cliff and stop myself. I realize now I did stop myself from that, and then I left that mountain and went on and lived got married, have 2 amazing children, have 2 grandchildren. My husband and I have been married 40 something years. Okay, so my husband was in the ER last night until 2:00. And so I'm here at home with the grandkids, and my daughter is there. And so I don't even know how many years we've been married at this particular point.
A long time. We'll just
long time, which we've had several therapists say to us, because he's a trauma kid too. And so we've had several therapists say to us, we have no idea why you're still married, but we are. And we've taken really good care of each other and picked each other up. And so he's looking toward gallbladder surgery is what we're looking toward. So at least we have an answer now. But anyway, if I lose track today, that's because I have no idea what I'm doing today. So
okay. I'll keep you on track. I'll pull you back in.
So that kind of is my story. So what happened was, when I realized, and we not only, we talk about trauma, and we're going to talk about the ACEs, which is based in trauma. And we also talk about, I also learned that I didn't have an attachment relationship with my mother, and because of her trauma. So it's generational. And so all of a sudden I realized that trauma and attachment go together. They are interlocked. And without that attachment relationship, it's very difficult for you to have the kinds of experiences that you need to heal from trauma as a child. So I got connected with the Attachment and Trauma Network. I went to speak at their conference, and I got introduced to ACEs, which I'll talk about in a minute. And anyway, my life just all of a sudden, I'm like, this is so important. Once you see the effects of trauma, which I'm going to share with you today, which are embedded within the ACEs, then you can't ever unsee that. And the work that you do, and I just want to say thank you for everything you are doing. I was so excited to be able to talk to a group that's doing the kind of work that you're doing. And so, because you can make a difference, because healing is possible, and it's in great part relationships. It's all about relationships. So anyway, I in my bio, you saw everything that I'm doing now, which was so unexpected, but that's kind of how I got involved in trauma-informed advocacy work, and healed by writing and then published. And I've got book number 4 probably coming out in the spring. So,
and so one other question, which I think you touched on, just how this work can intersect with the work that everybody here is doing. Is there?
I got excited, didn't I?
I like it though.
Right in the middle of it, I looked at everybody's face and I went, "Oh, thank you for what you're doing." And that is the intersection, because what I'm going to talk about today, and what my advocacy work does, is to help people to understand how trauma affects people, and how the things that we do make a difference. The people we care for, the people we hold compassion for, the people that we provide resources for, all makes a difference in helping them to work through the adverse effects of their childhood experiences. And so that's what I do, and that's what you do, and that's the intersection.
Wonderful, thank you. Just one more thing before we turn on your slideshow, and then we can continue having these conversations. But one thing that we've noticed, especially in our young people, is that the pandemic itself can be viewed as an adverse childhood experience for a lot of kids, not all kids. But is that something that you would recognize?
I think that the pandemic has made the needs of our children more obvious. it has also affected it. And I'm going to be talking about, because it can be really discouraging hearing. And I'm so glad, Barbie, that you started with the idea that healing is possible, because sometimes some of what I'm going to share today will seem like, well, is there any hope? Is there any hope for people? Yes, there's hope. There absolutely is hope. One silver lining to the pandemic is that we actually talk about mental health as a society. And people are interested in learning about trauma, and because for years we were just crying in the wind, and we didn't realize, but it's put it up front and center. But I'm going to talk about positive childhood experiences kind of at the end of talking about the ACEs, and that is what makes a difference. And many of our children have lost their ability to access positive experiences, because they haven't been in school. Some of them are home with abuse, where the abuse is actually taking place. My daughter is an assistant principal here in Spanaway. And some children have just vanished. During the shutdown, they lost contact with them, which is a very frightening thing. And so, but your organization, you can do things that kind of pick up those pieces. And so I think community organizations are one of the keys to helping that. But yes, this has been a devastating, in education, we say the children are 2 years behind. If you have a third grade class, you need to figure that you're teaching first graders, not necessarily academically, but emotionally and socially and in mental health ways. It's developmentally impacted them. And so, yes, absolutely.
Okay, you want to share your amazing information and we can talk through some of that?
I'd just like to just break in for a second, and we are going to have a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any questions, just remember to put them in the chat. Thank you. Over to you, Janine.
Okay, let me get. Wow, that's about the smoothest share slide screen. Maybe I need to be tired. Usually I'm like, where did he go? All right, so I'm just going to talk about, and my introduction to ACEs actually came originally because I've always had weight issues. So I've gone from near anorexia to obesity to every possible thing in between. And when I began healing, I realized that a lot of it had to do with my trauma and protected and the different effects and so forth. So I was kind of on a search to find information that connected that. And the two researchers who developed the ACEs, they originally started with realizing that the people that they were working with for mental health, a lot for physical medical problems, that obesity was a huge part of that. And that and they noticed that they'd had difficult childhoods. And so they started thinking, is the difficult childhood in some way connected to their obesity as an adult? And I mean, it's almost ludicrous that we think, is our childhood experiences connected to medical problems as adults? Really? And that's almost a known fact now, and those of us who were out there trying to spread the word and get everyone on the same page to realize that. But when I first ran into that information, I was like, what? And that was when I ran into the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences Research Study. And it was originally a study. And by the way, the slides are available. There's going to be a link to my Dropbox, so you'll be able to access these. Over 17,000 healthcare maintenance organization members from Kaiser. What they did was they worked with the CDC and some colleges or universities to do the research. And what they did was they took their medical record and then they had them complete 10 questions. So the questions involve things, for instance, potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood 0 to 17 years. Did they experience violence or abuse? Did they witness violence in their home or community? Did they have a family member attempt or die by suicide? Also, aspects of the child's environment can undermine their sense of safety, stability, and bonding, such as growing up in a household with substance abuse, mental health problems, instability due to parental separation, or household members being in jail or prison. So what they did was they asked the 10 questions, and my computer shrinks it. Oh, well, it's still there. They asked the questions, and then they compared the questions and the number of ACEs, and that's where the number of ACEs comes from. When people say, what is your ACE score? I have an ACE score of 5. Okay, that did not determine my life. It doesn't indicate everything about my life, which I'm going to, but it is an indicator that I experienced significant trauma as a child. And so when they came up with the score, then what we found was the higher the score, the greater the incidence of health problems and mental health problems and various other things. So I'm going to show you a series of charts, and notice there's like stairways, and that is the increased number of ACEs. So it goes from 0 ACEs, 1, 2, 3, 4. So childhood experiences versus adult alcoholism. So if someone has an ACE score, and I'll give you some more exact statistics later, but if they have an ACE score of 4, then they will have a greater propensity to being, and it doesn't mean they will absolutely grow up and be an alcoholic. No, but they will have a greater propensity. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is.
And can I just jump in here really quick? Because I think this is a really important part, that when we are working with somebody who's, let's say it's alcohol problems, to take it all the way back to the adverse childhood experiences is just a really interesting thought, to say, if we could heal that, maybe we could heal what's going on now. So I think that's just a really powerful point.
Yeah, and I'm going to pause here too, because Gabor Mate, his work, his book, which I did not put on the list, but I can share that. And on my website, I have a website, it's just Janine.org. And on one of my pages about learning about the ACEs and becoming trauma informed is what the page is. There's just a short clip about, because actually what happens is children who are not able to self-soothe, where they do not learn the skill of self-soothing, which is almost inherent in any attachment trauma situation, then they grow up looking for ways to soothe themselves. And because they did not learn in that, a lot of it has to do with the mother's gaze. And that's why sometimes our disconnection with babies while we're on our cell phones is really a problem, because it's the mother's gaze and her attention to the child and attunement with a child that helps the child learn to co-regulate. So you have to have a regulated adult in order for a child to learn to regulate. And when the adult is not regulated, then the child does not have that opportunity to do that. It's not that it can't be made up in other ways, but it has to be very intentional. So they go and they choose ways that they will soothe themselves. So this all connects into this. So we also have smoking as an adult, and you see the same chart. So notice the stair steps. The next one is impaired worker performance, which has to do with absenteeism, financial problems, and serious job problems. And I mean, does this seem like the list that you're looking at all the time? Childhood underlying chronic depression. Also, sexual behaviors and suicide, intercourse by 15, teen pregnancy, and teen paternity. And it's a stair step. So the more adverse childhood experience they have, the more likely this is going to happen as a teen. And then suicide attempts. And so I I'm really an optimistic person and kind of upbeat, and I could not, when I realized that I had tried to drive my car off a cliff, I thought, what on earth? Even if something had happened to me as 23, which it did, why would that? But it was the underlying childhood adversity that was underneath that trauma that really led me to that cliff. And so you have to look at childhood experiences. I put this slide in because I'm sure it's the suicide among our teens, and that's really how Barbie and I met in that discussion in the panel on mental health. We did a lot. And so I put this slide in here. An ACE score of 7 or more increased the risk of suicide attempts 51-fold among children or adolescents and 30-fold among adults. And the nearly 2/3, 64% of suicide attempts among adults were attributed to ACEs, and 80% of suicide attempts during childhood adolescence were attributed to ACEs. And you know, a lot of times we'll look at a family and we'll say, oh, they're a great family. Why? What's that? Well, a lot of times the teen suicides are connected to bullying, and that's why this point is so important. While system responses to family violence continue to place a greater emphasis on physical forms of abuse, the stronger predictor for future suicide attempts in ACE research was emotional abuse. And so when we have someone that says, well, I was never hit as a child. I was never, so they say I wasn't abused, but there was emotional abuse within the family, and that can take all sorts of forms. And so and bullying a lot of times is more emotional than it is physical. We've really pretty much stopped a lot of the physical abuse, but the internet gave opportunity for more emotional abuse. And so that's important for us to remember. So Bessel van der Kolk and the book The Body Keeps the Score. And when I talk to audiences, I never know, you know, how much have they read, how much have they haven't. But I would always say this is Bessel van der Kolk's book, which I have on my resource list, is the book that will explain so much of this. As the ACEs study shown, child abuse and neglect is the single most preventable cause of mental illness, the single most common cause of drug and alcohol abuse, and a significant contributor to leading causes of death, such as diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, and suicide. So, you know, our struggles, I have a friend who is on the, he's head of a task force for Green Lake with the homeless population. So I'm a member of his Facebook page, and I follow him. Actually, I knew him when I was in 8th grade, and we ended up here together, and he's dating my best friend, and it's weird. This is like weird when that happens. So anyway, but the homeless situation is really, this is where it starts. This is the root cause for what we're looking at there. And when you understand that, you can't unsee it. You cannot unsee trauma once you see the effects of trauma and how it destroys family, culture, everything. And so anyway, all right. I think we're ready to go. Let me just go through my slides, and then we'll go through the questions, and we'll see if there's other items, because I want to take my slides down because I don't want to spend the whole day up here. So resilience, this is the good news. The positive childhood experiences depend on supportive, responsive relationships and mastering a set of capabilities that can help us respond and adapt. And that's that self-soothing piece and co-regulation. It's those capacities and relationships that can turn toxic stress into tolerable stress. So my resiliency score is really high. My positive childhood experiences, which I have on this slide. This is a list of things that help children to be resilient, or help adults, help anyone. There's not much difference. So you as an organization are providing these. You are coming into situations where it looks dismal and you are providing positive experiences. And Bruce Perry, in one of the books that I recommend, What Happened to You, he talks about that it doesn't have to be big, huge things. It can be a conversation. It can be a hug. The pandemic has been horrible for hugs. It can be a sense of giving them a sense of belonging, a place to come where people listen to them. All of this is what builds resiliency piece by piece by piece. And that's how we combat the effects of ACEs. Okay. So, and so I'm going to do this slide and then I'll go off and this is my fire hose section and I'm done with this at this point. Okay. Developmental trauma. Why is it so damaging? Why are the ACEs so damaging? It's because it actually changes the structure of the brain. So there's a lack of growth in the prefrontal cortex. This is me walking. I always put this little girl in every slide I do, because this is me walking into therapy with my brain and asking my therapist, can you fix this? Okay. There's some serious trouble going on up there and I need you to fix it. But what I didn't understand was that my brain had actually been structurally changed as a result of my early childhood trauma. And especially if it occurs in early childhood. In fact, and okay, I'm going to get off on this, but a lot of my work I do is with early childhood infant. And if a child has a very healthy first 2 months of life with the supportive adults, then they can experience abuse later on, but it will never affect them as greatly as if that neglect and abuse occurs in those first 2 or 3 months. So supporting early intervention in the lives of young mothers who lack supports is one of the most important things you can do, because all of this is being built in that time period. And it sets the framework for all of their mental health after that. And I won't read through all that because it's, technical. But if you notice that people keep repeating, like you're just like, oh my gosh, you made that mistake a month ago. And you're going to go and you're going to make that same mistake. I call it a trauma loop. And it's because of the structure of their brain. They have deep roots in their ruts in their brain where they just keep going down those paths again. It's not a moral failure. And I speak a lot to church groups, and that's my soapbox, is quit telling people that they are spiritually or morally failing. No, they're experiencing the effects of trauma, and shaming them, it does absolutely no good. It's not bad character. It's caused by actual changes in the brain. Okay, so let me go off of this. Stop share. And so I may refer back to that as we keep answering questions, but go, Barbie. You're muted.
Sorry about that. That was so, it was so much information, but I think this is the work we do and knowing where we need to pay attention. Just that working with new moms is so important to know, like, we can be a part of preventing an actual human from experiencing that kind of trauma if we can get to them early. So thank you for that. And my question would be, what do you think is the most important takeaway about all that research? What would you say is like number one most important, or 1, 2, and 3?
I think that the slide that I showed about the actual changes in the structure of the brain is the most important thing for us to remember, because I think that when we look at people repeating poor choices again and again and again, it's so easy to become judgmental. And say, there's this horrible clip on, what was it, the Bob Newhart show, where he's a terrible therapist and he just keeps saying, stop it. And I sometimes I just pull that up in when I speak, when I have more time, because it's just the most horrible thing there. She's so afraid of being buried alive in a box, and he's just like, well, just stop it. And when you realize that they can't just stop it, they have to build, in one of the books, how what happened to you. Bruce Perry talks about, it's like there's a road that they have built in their brain. And have you ever driven someplace so often and you're headed somewhere else, but your car turns down that road anyway? You're just like, what am I doing? I'm not going to school. Trying to go to the store. And all of a sudden you've gone down that road and you had no intent. And so that's how the brain works. And so, it's one thing to go on the wrong street and have to turn around and get back to the store. It's another thing when it is a return to drugs, or it's a return to alcohol, or it's a return to the ways that you've learned to survive. And that is really what all of that is. Alcoholism, smoking, all of those things that increase with the ACEs are merely ways that people have survived. And they're still alive. So it worked. It didn't work well. It's damaging for their lives, but they're still alive. And without those things, they might not be alive. So it's saying my internet is unstable. So I'm hoping we don't have wind today. So
no. Well, and I think the part about the brain too, when you understand that about yourself, you can also give yourself some compassion. And when you share these things with other people around you, like I often tell my sister when I make mistakes over and over again that I've been making my whole life, I just now remind her, I'm like, it's my brain damage from my trauma. So I'll get right back on that and reroute.
Yeah.
But
that's what Bruce Perry says. You have to build a new superhighway, but it doesn't mean you're not going to go off-roading sometimes. When you off-road, then you have to have compassion on yourself, right? So one of my things was I have learned helplessness, and then I married someone who absolutely takes wonderful care of me, but it's very easy for me to be a helpless child and not do things for myself that I obviously am capable of doing. And so I'm fighting through some of those right now, but I'll hear myself say, can you drive me to the doctor? No, Janine, you can drive yourself to the doctor, right? And so, but that's that road where my whole life, I have depended on other people to do things for me that were difficult for myself. And so, and then I can do things like this and stand in front of thousands of people and write books and, it doesn't even make sense, right? So, yeah, I think that's so important in self-compassion. Instead of beating myself up and saying, oh, good grief, I just say, wow. Janyne, which was my childhood name, Janyne stepped in right there and thought she needed help doing that. And I'm going to be the adult and take care of this. So
beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And then you also teach teachers in education graduate courses in neuroscience and trauma. So can you tell us what the most important understanding is that you want to share about that between neuroscience and trauma?
So I was approached by Tabor College to become involved in their brand new Master's in Education program. And it was not anything I ever expected to do in my life. And I just completed a class on current trends in trauma and neuroscience. And so I'm going to tell you the takeaway that the students, what they figured out. And this is a faith-based college. And so they relate it to their faith, so they say, this program has enabled me to see people through the eyes of Jesus with compassion. And I think that the power of understanding ACEs and understanding trauma and understanding for whether you're faith-based or not, and the power is that it changes our level of compassion, because we no longer see an adult who just keeps making the same mistakes all over and over again. We see probably most likely a hurting child who has never been able to learn to change the structures in their brain that would help them to be able to make different decisions. And the interesting thing about therapy is that they've actually done research where they did brain scans and went through a series of therapy, which talk therapy isn't necessarily what trauma needs. it doesn't really do any good to keep talking and talking about it, because then it just builds those ruts. But because the trauma is in the body, so it's a very it's a bottom up approach to trauma, and I talk a lot about that in my books.
And can you actually share the type of therapy that you did, that you share in your first book?
The type of therapy that was used was EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it is, some people ask, is it like being hypnotized? No, it's not like being hypnotized, but because you're fully aware, but at the same time, it enables you, because your prefrontal cortex has all sorts of strategies from getting you to the memories that are painful, all sorts of things. And you see that resistance with people all the time. And so what it does is it's bilateral stimulation, and it allows you to get beyond those protective, and allows you to get down into the emotions of the memory, not necessarily the memory. You never actually have to share what the memory is, but you feel the emotions of it. And it helps you to use your adult mind to look at that, because children's emotions are terrifying. They are huge. They are big. They don't know what to do with them. And that's what's hidden down inside. And it allows you to, as an adult, to go back in and reprocess those memories that are so difficult. So, so I have quite a bit at my website. I have links and different things to understand EMDR. And there's that's not the only trauma informed therapy. And I share some of the other ones also.
Okay. Thank you. And so that's one of the things that we want to know is, what other resources would you recommend for all of those here?
Okay, let me share my screen again and go. I have more resources at my website, but I didn't want to overload. So I put the three major, if I'm going to go for information to websites, these are the three. And of course, Barbie, I could have put NAMI on there, but that would have been polite, but I didn't, you know. And so she already gave you that information. And then the Attachment and Trauma Network, that I oh my goodness, the Attachment and Trauma has transformed my life. So I always want to give a nod to them. But then the three books, Nadine Burke-Harris is the Surgeon General for the state of California now. And her work began with her understanding of the ACEs. And so the deepest well is her story in the San Francisco area of realizing that what she was seeing in her clients she's a doctor, and what she was seeing in her clients was the result of the ACEs. And so anyway, that's her story of that. So it's a beautiful, beautiful story explaining how the ACEs affect not only the child, the adults, generations, communities, everything, and the work she did there. And then the book that I mentioned before, and both books that I've mentioned before, The Body Keeps the Score and What Happened to You. But I also list other resources on my website. And we also have the Attachment and Trauma Network. We have a what's the name of the organization that it sets up bookstores for organizations. And so, but we choose, the Attachment and Trauma Network chooses, and on one of my pages, the resource page, there's a link to that. And if you buy books through them, then we get, you know, a little bit back from it. But it's a wonderful list of trauma informed resources that I would recommend. And then
this is my favorite part, because this is where I kind of began my entire healing process, was with your first book. So tell us, like, what is in your books that you think would help everybody here, whether they're experiencing something themselves or working with somebody. What do you think is in your books that would help?
So the first book, Brave, it is my story of therapy. My therapist who helped me on that journey, she writes the foreword in that book, and it's just, I don't know. I owe my life to her. You hate to be that effusive over a therapist, but it is the absolute truth. And so that is my story of therapy and the unraveling and the diagnosis, which I haven't talked about today because it doesn't necessarily fit in, but many dissociative coping mechanisms are the main way that many people on a spectrum work through, and it goes all the way from daydreaming to splitting up and different personalities. So that's what I talk about in that book, but it talks about the trauma that I lived through, my understanding of it, my acceptance of myself, compassion, and so forth. Then my second book I wrote specifically because I began to understand children, the effects of trauma on children, and how you could look at their behaviors with a trauma lens. And so they weren't being obnoxious, naughty children. No, they were trying to survive. So one example of that is manipulation is really what a powerless child learns to do to survive. And it turns into very unhealthy adult strategies, but it is a survival skill. And so if you see someone who's very manipulative, that you would call manipulative, you are looking at a survivor right there. And so that's kind of the thing I talk about in that book. And then my last one is my faith journey. And notice it's the yellow brick road on the way to the Emerald City. And so this was written, and it kind of tracks our move to Washington from Colorado, and the yellow brick road was my writing that helped me heal. So gives nod to Seattle on the way. So that if you are a person of faith, that kind of includes everything of my struggles, thinking I had spiritual problems when I didn't. I just had effects of trauma. So anyway, that does that. I'm going to take that down.
Okay.
And all of these are available. Well, they're available at the ATN website that you can connect through my, and also through Amazon, every place. They're everywhere. So
yeah, and I highly recommend.
Okay, we have 8 minutes or however long. Questions.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to say a huge thank you for the time you have spent here with us today, but also in preparation for this presentation. I know these things don't just happen in 10 minutes. Thank you for sharing so much. It's given us lots of things to think about and some research to do. I just want to just kind of sort of scoot back on some of the things you said and relate them to what we see at the food bank and to my fabulous volunteers who are here. Resilience and relationships, I think that's where the volunteers specifically come in, and making relationships with the clients that come to the store, recognizing people, chatting, the eye contact. And we don't do hugging at the food bank, especially in the times of COVID, but there are definitely some elbow bumps that go on between volunteers and shoppers that we know. And would you agree that that is where volunteers who are working in the store help with the resilience, that personal relation, making that relationship?
Absolutely. And I want to say, I should have said that about the hugging when I said that earlier. So thank you for bringing that up. The hugs they need permission. They need consent. And so, because I don't necessarily want to hug, but with people I trust, people who built a relationship with me, I'm all about hugs. So, but I would understand why that is not part of what you do. So, I absolutely, that piece is exactly why volunteers are needed, because the staff, they're so busy. You are so busy trying to keep everything afloat that as much as you want to have those personal relationships with people, you need people that volunteers that do not have all the other responsibilities to help you to fill in those gaps of relationships. So I can't say enough for volunteers. That's why I will come back. I will talk anytime you want, because I believe in what you're doing and I want to support you, because it is the volunteers that do that.
And
Thank you, Janine. Yeah, and I will hold you to that coming back, I'm certain. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Yes, thank you. So Barbie, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add on to that, which is one of the things that we teach in mental health first aid, is that what a child needs is a trusted adult. And in our minds, like a trusted adult is somebody who's very close to them, but sometimes it's not somebody who's very close to them. And it might just be one experience that you have with a child or with a adult too, that can change their life, or you can become a trusted adult with one sentence to them, and they can feel like there's somebody who would have their back, or they could come to if there's a problem. You don't even necessarily need to say or do anything, but pay attention to them and let them know that you are there and you're present. So it's a lot easier than we think it is, but the impact of that is giant.
Yeah, and we do focus a lot on customer service and, being available for conversations. And, I'm really ardent about the service that our shoppers get from volunteers and staff, for sure. And I absolutely love the piece about, well, there were two other bits that I really liked. I really loved the piece about self-compassion, and I think the information you have given us helps us be compassionate to others who we don't know what their adverse childhood experiences are or what sort of day they've had, but we just need to be aware that, that there are other things going on with our shoppers, for sure, and we play a huge part in that. And it gives us a place for some empathy. We can't see it exactly from their point of view, but we can be compassionate, understanding that maybe something else is going on with them. And the last bit, I love the driving image, and it happened to me the other day. I live quite close to the food bank, and I was actually not going to work. It was a weekend, but actually I drove to work, and before I even parked in my regular parking spot, I realized that actually I was meant to be going to the I-90. So I can understand from that perspective how our brain works a little bit more than I did before the start of this session. So I really, really appreciate it. And I think it's going to make me think about things that I do personally and give me a better perspective on other people. We see a lot of our homeless population have alcohol and substance use issues, and that trauma loop, I think, is one of those things that we maybe should study more as a team. So thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Nobody's put any questions in the chat. You could raise your hand if you have a question.
While you're doing that, that is hilarious that that you did that. So yes. Also, I want to say, because I went into teacher education because I knew that I had a teacher in 5th grade who made all the difference for me, and we need so much to support our teachers right now. It's a difficult place to be right now. And so I wanted to say that. And then there was a third thing, but my sleepy brain has lost it. So it may come back. Did we have questions?
No questions have come. So Janine, I hope your husband is doing okay, and that you managed to get a nap in there today before you have to go back to the hospital.
He's actually home. I mean,
he's home.
They send him home with pain meds, so he's happy.
Special kind of happy. So that's good.
now that he's happy.
Yeah. Thank you both. And Barbie, thank you so much for coming and for working on the presentation and inviting Janine. I really appreciate it. And we will stop the video and then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on at the food bank, and then we'll wrap it up for today.
Before you end, can I say one thing? One thing I've been trying to do, and I did not do this, and because I live in Puyallup, and which I'm still learning to say, and you are in Issaquah, and I always want to honor. I love how Washington State honors tribes, and I want to honor the native and the original people in this land, in this beautiful land that we share. And I meant to do that when I was doing the introduction. So I just wanted to stop and get that on the recording, because I think that that's an important thing, that trauma informed also includes those areas of recognizing everyone and the contributions they've made in our world. So thank you. And I have loved being here. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't have a Zoom for January, but the February Zoom is going to be on homeless outreach and our homeless outreach program. And Kaylin will be joining us. She's our homeless outreach coordinator, and she's going to give us some case studies, obviously with no names or distinguishable details, but some case studies of people that she has or is working with, and how we can best support her in this work. So yeah, okay, let's pause the recording. We'll stop the recording.